So today's topic is called the internal path, and this is an introduction to the program and all the things that we study in school. This is a school of Gnosis, and Gnosis, the word itself, comes from the Greek tradition, the Greek language rather, and what it means is knowledge. Okay? And the type of knowledge that we're looking for when we enter into the school is the search for an absolute and liberating knowledge. Knowledge that brings forth liberation from suffering, from all the things that serves as obstacles to our consciousness for its evolution. One of the main reasons to study Gnosis is to acquire wisdom, because wisdom brings forth happiness, right? And I think this is I think the fundamental aspect in everyone's lives, right? We're all trying to find happiness, and I can't put forth a concept about happiness because it's a personal experience for everyone. But of course, there are certain qualities about happiness that I think we can all agree on. Qualities like peace, like serenity, tranquility, peace of mind. All those things that are what everyone is essentially looking for. Whatever it is that you do, you're always trying to find that state, or that state of being, rather, of consciousness, where you are content and you're in peace and serenity. So the reason why we need knowledge is because through knowledge we can get to happiness. Because knowledge, or the knowledge that we try to find in Gnosis, is a knowledge that, when put into practice, brings forth wisdom and brings forth, as a result, happiness. So happiness is rather a result that comes about in our lives from the attitude that we have towards it. Okay? And as the Buddha mentioned, that the world is full of suffering, and suffering is caused by ignorance. So ignorance brings forth pain and suffering. Okay? So then, Matthew Ricard is a Buddhist monk from the Mahayana tradition, from the tradition of the Dalai Lama, from that school of Buddhism, and he is considered the happiest man in the world. Now, how can you really tell who the happiest person is? Well, this is where we get into how science is now helping us understand some of the things that some ancient cultures already knew. So what happened is they hooked this guy up to a machine, right, an MRI scans. They did scans on his brains when he was in deep states of meditation to see what was going on in his brain. So what they found out was that the parts in the brain that are related to sentiments of joy, of bliss, happiness, excitement, all those things lit up in his brain. Okay, and that was what put him aside from everyone, was that he actually his brain lit up, I don't know, like 10 times more than regular people or something like that, right? So they asked him, of course, what is happiness? And he says, happiness is a sense of satisfaction and contentment towards life. Okay, so happiness is rather an attitude that you have. It's something that comes within, from within. Okay, and one of the foundations of happiness is transcendental ethics. That's why I put here the ethical foundation of happiness has an ethical foundation. Sorry, right? So in the esoteric traditions, it is said that ethics is the bridge between us and the spirit and the spiritual realm. Okay, and
sorry.
Okay.
What's the
Come in. No.
Oops. Oh, yeah.
It's alive.
Yes. Much energy around here.
Flip it. Bueno, All right, so let's continue on. Happiness as an ethical foundation. And if we look at the Kabbalistic tradition, for instance, the Kabbalists have a picture or a map of how the universe, our internal universe and the universe is actually organized, right? And this is the picture that we see here. I don't know if you've all seen at some point something called the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, right? I know you have here. Yeah. That was his first question when he came in once. Yeah, let's do that. Right, so then the Kabbalistic Tree of Life is a map about how we have inner dimensions and the universe also has parallel dimensions. And now we've seen professors like Michio Kaku, who's a string theory, a physics professor, that he says that now him and a few colleagues have now been able to prove through mathematical equations how this universe has a three-dimensional aspect. It also has a fourth dimension, a fifth dimension, etc., until we get to a 13th dimension, or a 12th dimension that he says. So, interestingly enough, though, the ancient traditions of the Jewish people, like in the Kabbalistic tradition, they already knew these things. They said, yeah, well, the universe has 10 fundamental dimensions, okay, and so we have the inferior dimensions. I would say right now there are from the first to the fifth dimension, which are where we have our physical body, we have our vital body, we have the plane of or the realm of dreams, where everyone leaves when they go to sleep and they go to a different realm, etc. So those are all planes. The inferior planes, they divide those that space in three aspects, right? The magical or physical aspect of the universe, and then the one on top is the spiritual aspect. But the one in the middle, it's called the ethical triangle. If you see here, there are three triangles in the Tree of Life. You see the one at the top, one here in the middle, and then there's a bigger one here, right? So then we're down here in the physical world. Our soul is somewhere in the middle, and then our spirit, who we really are, is somewhere in the superior dimension. So that is why the saying, a soul one has, but a spirit one is. Okay? So then the bridge, they say, before you connect to the spiritual world, you have to pass through the ethical triangle. Because if you don't embody ethics, then you will continue to be a person that only interprets life with the mind and the five inferior senses. But now we know that we have other internal senses. We have intuition, for instance, telepathy, clairvoyance, all these things. Those are all internal aspects of ourselves, internal senses that we could develop and that we actually had at some point, but we started losing. So when we start to connect to ethics, or with ethics, which is a proper or a correct way of thinking, righteous thought, righteous action, and right sentiment towards life, a right feeling towards life, a correct feeling. Okay? So most of us, up until we start to have something called spiritual yearnings, we are simply exploring life right about, and just with theories that have been taught to us through tradition, culture, etc. But at some point in our life, we start to wonder, is there someone else? What's there to life besides just this plain physical existence, right? So then, we have three realities. Just like the universe has three realities, we also have three realities. We have our physical reality, we have our psychological reality, and then we have our spiritual reality. So most of us are only concerned with the physical reality, right? But at some point, the psychological reality starts to shake up, right? Which is in relation to the consciousness. So there's something beyond the mind that we call the consciousness. And even beyond that is the soul, or the essence of the person, right? So then the need of the soul, or rather, just like we have our physical needs, right? Our body has physical needs. our psychology also has needs. And the word psychology comes from the word psyche, which in Greek stood for soul, right? So then psychology has to do with the study of the soul. Okay? So then when we are all about our lives and we're fulfilling the needs, our physical needs, right? After we're done with our physical needs, and then our consciousness becomes active and starts to say, okay, you're done with your physical needs, now I'm going to ask for my needs, right? I have needs too. So then the consciousness starts to send, then the person starts to feel spiritual yearnings, which are questions, right? And here's where philosophy comes into place. Philosophy, or the science of philosophy, is the law for wisdom, the law for the essence of all things, which is to go deep into matters and reflect on them and trying to get to the source of things, right? Because for the most part, what we see in life is phenomena, results of things, right? But we don't see the causes of things. So enable for us to see the causes of things, we have to penetrate deep into philosophy and to have a direct experience of the source where all this phenomena comes from. Okay? So this is where the person starts to maybe try to find, again, happiness, right? So where do most of us try to find happiness? Okay? Most of us first put our faith in science, religion, culture, politics, money, all these things, which are part of our physical reality and they're important, but all those things do not guarantee happiness. In other words, your external environment is not going to guarantee your internal happiness, right? So in science and money, for instance, we placed our faith, let's say, on technological advancements, which have made life easier, more comfortable in a way, but hasn't necessarily brought us happiness. You know, the topic with money, for instance, there have been studies of, for example, people that have won the lotto, and they also at the same time they studied a group of people that had terrible accidents and couldn't walk for the rest of their lives. So they were, the whole point of the exercise was to see how their level of happiness was affected by the external aspects of life. So it turns out that both people, they obviously started in different points in relation to happiness, right? In the beginning, the people that won the lottery were very happy and excited, and the people that lost the ability to walk were sad and depressed, right? But the study showed that after a period of about 2 years, they were both at the same point in their level of happiness. The people didn't regain their ability to walk, and the people were rich still. But their ability, or their happiness rather, came down gradually until it got to the same point where they were before this big thing happened, right? So then, money is not really a guarantee that we're going to have happiness. Of course, money is going to buy it's going to satisfy the needs of the physical body, right? We need a house, we need clothing, right? We need food, and for those things we need money. So it'll be ridiculous for us to say, okay, now I'm a spiritual person, I don't need money, right? It's about finding balance, of course. So then we've also tried evolution, for instance, right? We said, yeah, with time things will get better, etc., etc. But in human history has shown that we're still the same barbarians that we were 2,000 years ago, right? We're still killing each other for some concepts about religion. Your religion is better than mine, etc., 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 right? Which is actually a contradiction to what religion stands for, because the word religion itself, just like the word yoga, they mean to reunite with your spiritual divine aspect. So somewhere along the lines, someone just kind of interpreted the concept the way they wanted and threw it out there. So politics, right? Politics have also increased the way of life, right? We've gained more rights. but even some extremists like Karl Marx says that, or he proposed the idea that even that just because now we are free, where before we were slaves, it doesn't mean that you're, or rather, we went from being slaves to simply just having the ability to walk around freely. But he says now, instead of being a slave of the owner, right, now you're slaves of a particular system, right? Because most people, unfortunately, live their lives to merely survive, right? They live their lives to go to work, meet the basic needs, and go back to work again, right? So now, when you were a slave before, and your Lord provided you with food, shelter, and clothing, now you have to go get those things on your own. So you're even worse than and even help. We don't even have a health care system anyway. So anyway, but I don't want to bash on all these things because those are all things that that we need as a society. The key here is to relate well with those things, right? Relate well with money, relate well with philosophical religious principles, which actually all come from the same source, right? We have religion that intends to reunite everyone, and now what we see in between cultures or between religions is that there's a sense of separateness, right? My religion is better than yours. This one is better than this one for this sense. My people is better, etc., right? But we fail to see that underneath all the religions, they all come from one source, right? It's like Master Samael says that all religions are like precious jewels, strong and the thread of divinity, right? So we don't want to connect with the religious form, which are the jewels. We'd rather want to connect with the string that unites all those, right? And all those religions have as the basis ethical principles of brotherhood, right? Of compassion towards others, of tolerance, all these things. And this sense of brotherhood is actually important because I think since we don't have that, that is the main reason why we need laws, right? The only reason we need laws is because we have lost the ability to relate correctly to one another. So I want to end this part with a quote from the Dalai Lama. They asked him, okay, well, what do you think the best religion is? Of course, the interviewer was like a trick question because he thought he was just going to say, of course, Buddhism, you know. But the Dalai Lama said something that was shocking to everyone. He said, whatever religion makes you more compassionate, more sensible, more detached, more loving, more humanitarian, more responsible, and more ethical, that is the best religion out there, right? I think it's such a beautiful answer because he is a person that you see that has connected with the universal ethics. The person that is able to see beyond separation. The person that does not see you being from a Christian faith and you being from a Jewish faith as an obstacle, right? To connect and to bond with one another. So all these things that I've mentioned above give us some sort of relative happiness, right? Because it's a happiness that it's not that it's dependent upon the external factors. So when you don't have that, then you're depressed. And I don't think anyone should go around with that. I think we all have the ability to actually embody happiness. So then, how do we do that? Okay, one of the ways to start the path to happiness is to start to listen to the needs of your consciousness, the needs of your soul, the needs of the psyche, right? To start to harmonize those three realities that we have, those three relationships: the physical aspect, the esoteric or psychological aspect, and the spiritual aspect. Okay. So, because we all definitely have this need to understand life, and this is where the search for happiness begins, right? This is the basic need of the soul. The soul needs to know itself, and that's why the soul comes here and takes this physical form so that she can starts to see herself. In the esoteric tradition, it is said that God contemplates himself in creation. Okay, that is how he gets to know himself. So before creation, he was just sitting around, I don't know where, and all of a sudden he said, okay, I don't really know myself, right? Just like us, right? And this is why we start to penetrate within. This is why we start to get into psychology, into philosophy, right? Because you're just this person that's moving around all the time, going to work, doing your things, right? Falling in love, but you don't really know yourself. And since you don't know yourself, then you don't have the ability to control your anger. You don't have the ability to control anything, any of your emotions, right? You think that things just happen and you should just get angry when someone insults you, right? So, the soul comes here to know itself, right? To learn about itself. And in that process, we begin to connect, or we begin to see, rather, that we have two psychological aspects about ourselves, right? We have an aspect that relates well with others, and some parts of us don't relate well with others. So what do? We just hide those parts and hope that nobody notices, right? And then we just kind of get together with the people that like us, right? The people that think like us, that feel like us, etc. And those that don't share the same concepts, the same ideas about life, we just kind of put them aside, right? We can't accept that psychological challenge. It's too threatening for us. Why? Because God forbid you actually might know something about yourself, right? Things will start to come out from your psyche that you never saw before, and then you say, "Wow, that's not really who I am. I don't know who I am anymore." So we don't like that, you know. It breaks our comfort zone. So we'd rather just stay in our little comfort zone, right? So this is the reason why most of us are afraid to actually explore ourselves, right? But this is what the soul is pushing you to do. The soul wants you to get out of the house, just like you get out of your parents' house, right, where you had everything. You said, well, I need to see what I can do for myself. So the consciousness does the same thing. Okay, so when we neglect those yearnings from our consciousness, from the soul, then we shut our door to happiness. So again, ignorance brings suffering. Right? This is one of the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha said. That the world is full of suffering, and suffering is caused by desire. Desire in the form of attachment. Okay? And so he tries to imply that when we get too attached to something that is temporal, right? Just like this physical body that is temporal, but we have a part of us that it's immortal and atemporal, then why should you get attached to this physical body, right? Or why get attached to the house that you might lose, etc., right? Does not mean that we should not appreciate what we have in the moment, right? We need to learn how to appreciate what we have. But appreciating and being attached to something are two different things, okay? So, Master Samael says, everyone plays an important role in society and has a purpose in life. Tragic is the existence of the one who dies without having known the purpose of one's life. Each one of us must discover for herself the purpose of her own life. I think that's such a profound statement. Tragic is the existence of the one who dies without having known the purpose of his own life. And especially now that we have people like, what's his name? Remember the guy that works at NYU and he works in the resuscitation department? Sam Pernia. There you go. I didn't come to me. He's a doctor, works in the resuscitation department at NYU, and he started separating cases of people that passed away and they were able to bring back. These people started bringing back experiences like being fully conscious of the environment while they were physically dead, or their heart wasn't beating, their brain was clinically dead, there was no electricity in the brain, anything. So the first question is, how can that person bring memory of what was happening? Right? He described when he was being driven to the hospital in the ambulance. He described the people that were there. He described things in the room that they were operated and then taken to another place where they actually woke up and regained consciousness, right? So a lot of these people had experiences where they were actually to perceive the world without their physical body. So that alone is proof that we are spiritual beings, right? That we have this physical body for a while, but then we change it, right? And I always love to bring the example of the shoe. It's like a shoe that you have. All of a sudden, you just decide to wear new shoes. So you change your physical body, right? And this is where the whole idea behind reincarnation and recurrence and all these things come into place from the Indian tradition. Or most famously from the Indian tradition, but if we study all the religious texts, we can see it. We can see it in the Christian tradition. We can see it obviously in Buddhism, and the Kabbalistic tradition as well. So then, if we have that conscious and non-material aspect about ourselves, that is conscious and can perceive life, then I think it's something worth to explore. And I personally feel that most people that have been successful in their lives, especially in history, that have to do something with the arts, with great philosophers, with great scientists, were able to listen to the yearnings of their soul, of their consciousness, and get ideas from the superior worlds, from the spirit world. Plato had the idea or the concept that there is the world of ideas, where things come from, right? And he always proposed the idea that if before the chair existed, there had to be the idea of the chair. So what is more real? The idea of the chair or the chair, right? Since the chair itself is only a representation of the idea, right? So he says, if you bring that to our personal level, then we're the same, right? We are, our physical body is simply a representation of who we really are, right? So then, and this also gets into the point of why we're here, right? Why come to this place? And simply because life is a scenario that the consciousness of the soul needs to explore and know itself, right? And then once you learn everything that you had to learn, then you simply move on to another plane of consciousness, etc. Right? So let's move into the third aspect, the paradigm shift that we call. Enable for us to start to connect with happiness and to get to know ourselves. We need to change the way that we perceive the world. Okay? Because the perception that we have of the world is a perception that has been implanted into us. Okay? And this is the coolest thing about the movie The Matrix, and I always bring it up. Movies like The Matrix, right? Do you see it yet?
Yeah.
Do you see it yet?
Of course.
Okay. You did your homework, nice.
Yeah.
Right, so the movie The Matrix, movies like Avatar, movies like Lord of the Rings, right? Why do we have Gandalf, for instance, right? Gandalf is always the ethical guy in the myth, right? Joseph Campbell, for instance, was a famous mythologist.
Yeah.
Right. So he was an expert in mythology, and he says that every one of us lives our own particular myth, and whoever disconnects from that myth or doesn't follow or doesn't connect with the archetypes of the myth, then his or her life starts to, or that's why they fall into depression, right? So we all need to become the hero of our own myth. And the hero in us is our being, our internal master, our soul, right? And this is what Gandalf represents, for instance, right? Gandalf is always the wise, the one that's very ethical, right? And why? Because in the Tree of Life, he represents Chesed, which is our intimate. And he is right in that triangle, which is the ethical triangle, which connects the spirit world with the physical world. So that's why he's always the one that's telling everyone to move forward and saying all these wise things that inspire you to go and march against an army of 10,000 and you're only like 10, right? But hey, he has ethical principle of like courage, for instance, right? What we have instead of courage is fear. So we do things out of fear. So Okay, so what we need to do is we need to change our paradigm shift. We need a paradigm shift, and a paradigm is a pattern or a model. Okay, like I said before, you've grown, or you were born into a particular family of a particular religion, a culture, etc., where you have told, or you have been, the world has been presented to you in a particular way. Okay, and that's how you interpret the world. The problem with that is that we rarely question those patterns or models, right? So then people that are raised to be racist, for instance, they never get over that because they never question that model because it's been working for their parents, for their grandparents, etc., etc. So then why change, right? So then, enable for us to start to shift that pattern, we need a Gnostic, or what we call the Gnostic Revolutionary psychology. So we need to get into psychology, into the study of the soul, the profound study of who we are, so that we can break free from our likes and dislikes that have been indoctrinated to us, right? Some people are Democrats, some people are Republicans, based on the programming, right, that they've seen in the news, right? Republicans usually go for Fox, right? Democrats like Comedy Central, that kind of thing. So there's a key that this philosopher from the past century, Samael Aun Weor, says. He says the quality of your life depends on the quality of your perceptions. Okay? So what he's saying is, based on the lenses through which you see life, that is going to dictate the quality of your life. Okay? If you look at life through the lenses of racism, of hate, of separateness, right, of intolerance, and that's going to give you a particular quality of life. Okay? And some people say, well, I was born this way, I can't do anything about it. Right? Well, you're wrong. Not because I'm saying it, because science is also saying it too. Religion says it. And now, if we get into the field of neuroplasticity, for instance, we can see how now they know that the brain, we learn through repetition, right? So every time that you repeat an exercise, that you repeat the way that you walk, the way that you talk to someone, that leaves imprints in the way that your neurons connect to each other, right? So then there is a way to change that, and that's why they call it neuroplasticity, because the brain, it's like elastic now. It can actually adapt to new circumstances. So if now you want to stop or eliminate certain aspects within you, all you have to do is kind of change or rewire your brain, okay? And we do this through constant self-observation and deep reflection, which is eventually going to lead us into meditation. Because meditation, it's in itself, it's simply a tool that we use to acquire information about ourselves, and at the same time, information about the universe, right? And this is why the Oracle Delphi in Greece, there's that inscription that says, "Noce te ipsum," man, know yourself, and you will know the universe and its gods, right? For the most part, we're looking outward to the world. That's what we try to find the answers for everything outside of us, ignoring that we have all the answers within, and we have happiness within. All you have to do is to simply connect with it, right? So this is very interesting because they did, or to illustrate the situation, that our brain cannot tell what is real. Okay, this is the conclusion that came about in studies that they did in Canada, in the university in Canada, where they asked people to put some headphones on, and they started playing some classical music or some tunes. Doesn't matter the music really. So they started taking brain scans again in the person, and they started to see which parts of the brain lit up while the person was listening to the music. Okay, so they took pictures, etc. Fine. So then afterwards, they asked the participants to take their headphones off, and now start to replay the music in their heads. Okay, so they did that, and the impressive thing is that the same parts of the brain lit up. So basically what the mind is telling the brain is what the mind it's what the brain accepts as real. Okay, and so the mind, or any thought, for instance, can create a biochemical reaction which is sent forth to the limbic system and spreads the message throughout the entire body. Okay, the limbic system is a system of nerves and networks in the brain concerned with instincts, moods, controls the basic emotions of fear, pleasure, anger, and drives like hunger, sex, dominance, and care of spring. So, depending on how we interpret a particular situation, our brain actually sends messages to the physical body and says, okay, it's time to be scared. It's time to run. It's time to sit down and be lazy, etc., right? So then we need to retrain or rewire our brain. We need to learn how to tell the brain or allow the brain to see the environment as it really is. Okay, this is one concept that most spiritual masters tell us, that we're constantly asleep because we're constantly reacting to environments that are illusory. Illusory because everyone is walking around with their own fantasy, interpreting the world in a way that it's not real. Okay, and that is why that is one of the causes of suffering, right? Because we cannot see how every present moment that we have, you can connect through to your internal happiness, to your internal peace and serenity. So instead of doing that, we're just walking around fantasizing about how to find happiness without realizing that all you have to do is just stop and not do anything, right? Well, not do anything, maybe not physically, but at least intellectually, right? You have to activate your consciousness. And so the consciousness is the bridge to connect us with our soul, with our reality. This is where we get this positive movement ideas and New Age movements about how you should always think positive because this brings positive positivity to your life, etc., right? And I'll end this section with a quote from the Buddha, of course, and he says, "We are what we think. What we are surges from our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." Right? So then let's start to pay attention to our thoughts. Let's start to pay attention to our programming, right? And the way to do that and to explore this is through meditation. Meditation is a technique or a tool that we use to acquire information, right? Information about ourselves. When we sit down to meditate, what we're trying to do is to connect, or to activate our consciousness, to activate our essence, so that we can go beyond the mind. It is said that the mind can only understand, but the consciousness is the only one that has the ability to comprehend, right? And taking it to a practical level, whenever you change your behavior, it's because you've comprehended something. Simply understanding things does not make you change your behavior, right? The mind has this ability to always find excuses and to always find a reason to say I'm right? And this is, precisely the problem that we have in the world, because people live in their minds. And that is why the mind, which is where the mind is that what starts to give shape to everything. And this is why in the third realm, in the inferior realm, it's called the magical triangle, or the mind starts to give shape to matter. Okay? So what we do with the mind is, obviously, we're always trying to find excuses to continue living the way that we do, and to prove that we are right, etc., right? But truth is, sometimes we're wrong. So who is it within us that is ready to accept that we are wrong, right? Or that we need to change certain things about ourselves? Is our consciousness, our essence, right? So meditation. In 2003, Time magazines put out an article about meditation. It said at that point, 2003, 20 million Americans were meditating. Why? And again, because it's a tool that we use to stop life. Okay? Meditation brings forth the ability of self-observation and self-remembrance. So when something happens, instead of simply reacting in a mechanical way, now you begin to have the ability to control your instincts, right? And simply stop and think about your reaction. Okay? Unfortunately, we live in a culture where we've been programmed to constantly be reacting to things, right? And this is why most people are realizing, yeah, I'm like a mechanical person, so I need to do something about it. And then they start to pick up meditation because they see that it helps with this. So then we get into something that in the Asian tradition they call the Qi, which is to stop and observe. Okay? Enable for you to actually act in a harmonious way, you need to first stop, observe the situation, deeply reflect on it, and then act. Right? Act now, not with the morals or concepts that you have about how to react in particular situations, but act based on universal ethics. And like I said, the consciousness is the one that's in touch with those universal ethics. And to put it in a very simple way, ethical principles generate harmony in your environment. Unethical principles generate disharmony. Okay? So that is why we need to make an effort to try to vibrate with ethical principles. And I have a little printout here which is pretty interesting about ethics, which is taken from Patanjali's book, from one of the Yoga Sutras. It's called Yama and Niyama. And he said that before, it says when a yogin becomes qualified by practicing Yama and Niyama, then a yogin can proceed to asana and other means. So before you actually try to sit down, asana is the posture of meditation, or if you do yoga, you're familiar with that. Before you even get to that, it says you need to connect with an ethical principle. And that's what Yama and Niyama are. They're ethical precepts. Ethical precepts. Every time that you connect with an ethical precept, you start to vibrate at a higher rate. Your consciousness becomes active. Now you separated yourself from the crowd because everyone's bottled up in their minds, and now you have an advantage. Now you can see life clearly, and you can use that to liberate yourself from the environment, right? So, as far as psychological benefits, again, it increases your cognitive capacity, and it gives you creative imagination, which is one of the aspects of genius minds. Right? If you try to study the greatest minds of all time, Leonardo da Vinci, even Albert Einstein, they didn't get their ideas by thinking. Most of them say that, for example, in the case of Albert Einstein, before he thought of the theory of relativity, he said it just came to him in a hunch, right? Through intuition, right? And intuition is your ability to grasp ideas that are coming from above, from that realm of ideas that Plato talked about, or the mind of God, which is Michio Kaku calls it right now. It's interesting to hear scientists say that the universe is the mind of God. Okay. And there are actually very interesting pictures that have come out about how a brain or neural connections in your brain actually are very similar to pictures of the universe taken from very far away. How all the clusters of galaxies are connected to one another, and they actually look like the way that neurons are connected. So some scientists are saying, wow, this is kind of mind-blowing, because if the universe looks like a brain, then who's doing the thinking? And what are we in there? So are we just a thought of someone else, right? Well, the Brahmins in the Indian tradition, they say that this universe is a thought of Brahma, right? Brahma is only knowing himself through us. So we're just, anyway. Okay, so the physical benefits, okay? It really lowers stress, lowers the risk of heart attacks and strokes, and boosts your immune system, and many other things. I think I'm just gonna stop here because you guys got the point, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So two things. First, I printed out two different sheets here. Maybe I'll print out for some more people, but this one talks about the precepts of ethics, right? And what are the aspects of ethics? For example, ahimsa, which is nonviolence, satya, which is truthfulness, always being true, right? Speak the truth, and just being honest, so honesty. The other one is not stealing, for instance. Even brahmacharya, which is it has to do with tantrism, with an ethical way of using the sexual energy and using that force to connect and bond with others. Also, abstention from greed, right? Don't be greedy. Don't attach yourself too much to things. Cleanliness, not only external cleanliness of the body, but also internal cleanliness, right? Purity of thought, purity and your relation with others and your sentiments, etc. Contentment, not spiritual complacency, but acceptance of the external situation. We are allotted in this time. Okay, so basically, just simply accepting the situation and trying to find the happiness in every single moment in life. Because happiness is just a natural state of the consciousness, right? The consciousness has nothing to complain about. It is. What's the consciousness worried about? Losing the physical body? It does that all the time, and then comes into another physical body, right? And we'll talk about that in another class when we talk about reincarnation and all those things, right? Austerity, self-study, spiritual education. We need to study sacred teachings. We need to study the contrast of what it is that we learn in society, what we learn in culture, right? You go to school, you study something, and they program you to think, feel, and act in a particular way. So you need something to contrast that. Say, all right, let's see what other cultures say, right? And then you try to find the path somewhere down the middle. And then surrender to God, surrender to your inner divinity, right? And that has to do with will. And this other printout is a relationship that I found between one of the sacred texts from India, the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the books from the Bible, it's St. Paul. And St. Paul talks about ethics, and he says ethics is, or the fruits, he calls it the fruits of the spirit, right? Things that come from people that are connected with their spirit. And he says things like, the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, all those things, right? And the reason why I compare that to Bhagavad Gita is because just so that we can see the similarities between different faiths, different cultures, right? That the underlying message or the underlying principle, ethical principle is within all of them. It's just a matter of that ethical principle expressing itself to different cultures and different times and different languages and symbolism, right? If you go to chapter 16 in the Bhagavad Gita, he talks about the yoga of the division between the divine and the demonical, right? So our divine attributes and our demonical attributes, or negative attributes. And he says pretty much the same thing. Fearlessness, purity of heart, control of the senses, sacrifice, studies, the scriptures, harmlessness, truth, absence of anger, renunciation, peacefulness, etc. These are teachings that came from, thousands of years before Christ. So then, how can we come here and say Christ was the only one that had the truth when, it's like, oh, wait a second, that teaching's no different than this one. So, why do we choose favorites, right? Well, because you've simply been conditioned to choose that one, right? And this is the importance of one of the precepts here. Swajaya, I don't know how to pronounce that. Self-study and spiritual education. Contemplation and application of the scriptures or sacred texts of our chosen paths. Okay, so I think I've talked too much. Do you guys have any questions? falling asleep?
No.
Yo quiero decir algo, pero lo digo en español y tú lo traduces.
Okay, so she wants to say something, but I'll translate it for everyone.
Que yo digo que es tan importante aprender a uno a controlar, o sea, aprender a conocerse uno mismo,
So she thinks that it's very important for us to know ourselves.
porque así como nosotros utilizamos nuestra mente para crear, como creamos cosas buenas,
Right. So it's just the same, because the same way that we can use the mind to create good things,
también podemos crear cosas
we
malas.
can also use it to create bad things.
Yo comparo o sea, digamos que la mente, ¿no? La mente la puedo comparar con un copo de algodón.
So she says we can compare the mind to a piece of cotton.
Si un pensamiento es cada pedacito de la fibra del algodón.
So every thought is like a thread from that piece of cotton.
Entonces, imaginémonos si el algodón, cada pensamiento que botamos, cada pedacito de algodón, creamos cosas que nosotros, o sea, como si estamos en el infierno, digámoslo así.
Right. So let's say that each one of those threads are thoughts that our mind is emitting. So
Creamos cosas que nosotros estamos engrandeciendo, digámoslo así, ese infierno.
right. So if we are in a negative state of mind or in an inferior state of mind in hell, then by thinking those thoughts, we're reinforcing that.
Pero si lo usamos, por ejemplo, nosotros con la atención, con la meditación, en el otro lado, ¿no?
But
En
if
el
we use
otro
our
side,
attention in practice of meditation, on the other side,
podemos, a través de ese algodón, podemos crear una tira.
so then
Un
through
hilo.
that piece of cotton, we can create a thread.
Podemos crear, o sea, de ahí, para mí, es donde vienen todas las ideas grandes, las ideas
then-
creativas, donde nos podemos agarrar. Si no
Right, so
sabemos,
that-
si tenemos esa fuerza,
So that thread becomes like a connection
esa conexión mental,
That
esa
connection-
conexión con la conciencia,
to the consciousness and to superior ideas,
es
etc.,
donde
which
nacen
we
todas
can
las grandes ideas.
hold on to. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I completely agree. This is why. The last quote. Thank you for that. The last quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. Come on. A quote by Laozi. He says, "Watch your thoughts. They become words. Watch your words. They become actions. Watch your actions. They become habit. Watch your habits. They become character. Watch your character because it will become your destiny." That's Laozi. Thank you. Yeah, it's a woman.
Aquí está.
Okay, so let's do a little meditation now to kind of try to connect with our inner being.